They say reality is all around us, but what if everything you've ever believed about time, space, and existence was only one layer of the truth? What if what you touch, what you see, what you name, real, is merely the thinnest veil stretched across an infinite expanse of hidden knowledge and silent watchers? Behind the fabric of the ordinary, beyond the curtain of the world, there exists a mystery that breathes and shifts alive, watching, waiting, and once in a century, someone gets too close. Helena Blavatsky was one of those rare few. Her name echoes like a storm in hushed corners of spiritual study, occultism, and metaphysical philosophy, but most people have only scratched the surface of who she really was. The world remembers her as a writer, a mystic, a charlatan to some, a visionary to others, but none truly understand what she encountered, and even fewer know what she brought back with her. She wasn't just a philosopher, she was a vessel, not simply a woman who spoke of the unseen, but one who saw the unseen and lived among it. Before the term multiverse entered the scientific vocabulary, before theories of quantum superposition and entangled dimensions became subjects of fascination in mainstream physics, Helena Blavatsky was already navigating those realities. Through her consciousness, her spirit, and her will, she didn't just speak of different realms, she walked through them. Her early years gave no hint of what she would become. Born into aristocracy in Russia in 1831, Helena was a rebellious child, always questioning, always exploring. She was known for her defiant nature, her resistance to authority, her insatiable curiosity. Her family dismissed her strange visions, her trances, her talk of beings that moved behind walls and voices that spoke in dreams. They attributed it to childish fantasy or emotional instability. But even then, she knew something was different about her. She could sense when a place held memory and energy that lingered from events long past. She could tell when someone was thinking of her before they entered the room. She often spoke of a hidden voice that instructed her in languages she had never studied, symbols that hovered in the air when she closed her eyes, and a presence that would stand beside her in mirrors, not quite her reflection. She fled marriage at a young age and began traveling the world: Egypt, India, France, England, the United States. But it was her years in Tibet that changed her. There are missing years in Helena's official biography, gaps that historians can't explain, places she claimed to have gone that leave no trace, teachings she described from monasteries no Westerner had ever seen. She spoke of a sacred brotherhood, the Mahatmas, beings who operated beyond the visible world, guardians of hidden truths who chose her as a mouthpiece. But that's only what she told the public. The deeper truth she confided only to the few she trusted was far stranger. In the isolated heights of the Himalayas, she claimed to have entered a place that existed simultaneously in this world and another, a monastery built not of brick and stone, but of thought and resonance, a location that shimmered, flickered, and would vanish if approached with doubt. The monks there were not monks in the ordinary sense. Some, she said, were hundreds of years old, not because they had refused death, but because they had transcended the cycle of decay. They taught her how to silence the mind so deeply that the dimensions began to dissolve. She learned that what we call matter is only condensed vibration, and that there are realms built of subtler tones, subtler harmonies. They showed her the maps not of Earth, but of layers of existence, planes of reality stacked like sheets of light, each vibrating at different frequencies, each governed by its own laws, intelligences, and inhabitants. Some dimensions mirrored our world closely, others were almost unrecognizable. And then there was the 10th layer, a realm of potential, chaos, and consciousness before form. She was warned never to go too far into that place, but curiosity was her nature, and she did go too far. Helena spoke rarely of what she saw on the 10th layer. The few descriptions she gave were terrifying. She said it was like staring into the original mind of the universe, before it dreamed itself into stars and creatures and logic. There was no time there, no self, only awareness, vast and unfiltered. Thoughts did not arise, they became. Every flicker of consciousness shaped the fabric of that realm instantly. There were beings, though not in any form we'd recognize, that drifted through that space, like rivers of will, carrying seeds of creation and destruction. She described seeing something that could only be called the blueprint of existence ever shifting, alive, as if reality were a living, breathing intelligence constantly evolving from the inside out. When she returned, if one can call it returning, Helena was never the same. She could speak fluently in languages she had never studied. She would fall into trances and produce entire books written in mysterious symbols that shimmered and pulsed on the page before fading into ordinary ink. Her gaze unsettled people. It was too steady, too aware, as if she could see not just you, but all the possible versions of you at once. She carried with her an ancient book bound in leather unlike any animal known, its pages delicate and cold to the touch, filled with text that shifted each time she tried to read it. She said it was not a book in the traditional sense, but a dimensional key, a mirror for the mind that revealed what you were ready to see. People flocked to her. Some were inspired, some were terrified, some tried to silence her. She founded the Theosophical Society not just to teach, but to create a shield and network of seekers who could protect and preserve what she was releasing into the world. But what most of them didn't realize was that Helena was never trying to create a movement. She was trying to prepare humanity for something. She had seen the future. She had seen the consequences of dimensional ignorance, and she knew that the walls between the worlds were growing thin. Governments watched her closely. Secret societies approached her with offers, threats, and demands. Some wanted the book. Some wanted to study her. Some simply wanted her gone. But Helena had already learned how to blur herself into the folds of reality. At times, she would vanish for hours, only to reappear with no memory of where she had been, or with symbols carved into her skin that matched no known language. She began to hint in private letters that she had made contact with intelligences not native to our universe. She described encounters with beings who did not speak, but infused understanding directly into her nervous system. They taught her the mechanics of dimensional consciousness, how every human thought either stabilizes or distorts the boundary between realms, how belief is not imagination, but construction, how our world is built not from atoms, but from agreement. The idea that humans create reality is not new, but what Helena revealed was the reason why and how. Each thought, she said, is a tuning fork, each emotion, a signal. The universe listens. The dimensional layers are not static, they respond. Reality is fluid, and our participation in it is constant. This is why, she insisted, fear is so powerful. Fear distorts frequencies. It bends the shape of your world. And when enough people share the same fear, it reshapes the collective reality. This is how empires rise and fall. This is why history repeats. This is why dreams feel real, because they are, just in a different dimension. But Helena also discovered that these dimensions are not just reflections of human thought. They are habitats. They are filled with entities, some benign, some indifferent, some predatory. She warned that certain rituals, certain technologies, and even certain types of music could open gateways unintentionally. The veil is thin where intention is strong, and sometimes those on the other side are watching for a crack. Helena never saw herself as a prophet. She hated worship. She hated being labeled. She said labels were traps, mental walls that prevent understanding from evolving. Yet people kept trying to categorize her, to explain her, to contain what she represented. But you can't contain a being who has walked outside time. Toward the end of her life, she became increasingly secretive. She spoke of a coming event, a resonance, a dimensional alignment that would pull the layers of reality into temporary sync. During this alignment, perception and matter would blur, and humanity would be forced to confront the deeper nature of its own existence. She called it the Great Thinning. She believed that during this moment, those who were prepared would awaken to a deeper truth, while those who weren't would fall into madness, trapped between dimensions they could not understand. She did not believe this event was decades or centuries away. She believed it was beginning. Her final years were filled with strange phenomena: clocks stopping, electrical equipment failing, animals behaving oddly in her presence. She would stare into mirrors for hours, speaking in languages unknown. Her skin would grow cold for days, her pulse nearly undetectable, as if she were more ghost than woman. When she wrote, The words would sometimes vanish from the page minutes later. She said reality was beginning to unwrite itself, that the dream of the world was fraying. And then, one night, she disappeared. The room was locked from the inside. No one saw her leave. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, only a perfect circle of scorched floorboards and a lingering scent of ozone. Like lightning had touched the air. Her journals were gone. The strange book was gone. Only one note remained, scrawled in trembling ink. I was never from here. Official records claim she died of influenza. But those close to her knew better. They believed she had finally crossed into the 11th gate, a place she had always hinted at, but never fully described. A dimension that exists not above or below, but within. A realm not bound by time, not shaped by space, but made entirely of consciousness, the place from which all realities emerge, and to which all eventually return. In the quiet nights of Tibet, where the winds howl like the whispered remnants of ancient chants, Helena sat cross-legged within a stone cave carved high above the reach of civilization. No lantern flickered beside her, no food or water rested nearby, and yet she remained still, breath shallow, eyes half closed, not asleep, not awake, not entirely here. Her body, aged by the world but seemingly untouched by time, was motionless. But her mind was soaring. She had gone beyond meditation. This was not stillness, it was immersion into a current flowing through realms unseen, a current that few even believed existed. And in this current, Helena floated, pulled not by desire or fear but by an invitation. She never sought power, she sought understanding. And what she found surpassed even the boundaries of imagination. They told her she would go mad, that no human could withstand what lay in the in-between. The monks who trained her spoke in riddles, guarding their wisdom behind tests of silence, compassion, and surrender. They didn't teach her like a student, they transformed her into a mirror, a vessel that could reflect the shape of things that had no form. At first, the veil was thick, dense with doubt, with the noise of her previous life. But days turned into weeks, and the world grew quieter. Her name lost meaning, time lost edges. She stopped seeing herself as a person sitting in a cave and started experiencing herself as a pattern, one thread woven into a much larger fabric. It was then the voices began. Not voices in the auditory sense, but impressions that pressed against her consciousness like ripples from a distant storm. They didn't speak with grammar or tone. They transmitted knowing, direct, unfiltered, overwhelming. Helena struggled at first. The mind resists when the soul is flooded. But she let go. She allowed the fear to dissolve. The moment she did, the cave melted away. She was no longer in Tibet. She was in the city of crystal and flame. She would later call it that, not because of its physical qualities, though it shimmered with light and pulsed with warmth, but because of how it felt. As if every surface vibrated with memory, as if every wall carried emotion, as if every stone was sentient and humming with awareness. It wasn't a city in any traditional sense. It had no streets, no buildings, no gravity. It was an architecture of consciousness. Forms emerged from intention. The place built itself around her thoughts and reshaped as she moved. She saw towers of translucent light that rose into nowhere, spiraling roads of fire that danced beneath her feet, yet caused no pain. But the most striking part was the beings. They were not human. They had no flesh, they had no mouths, no eyes, no bones. They were shapes within shapes, geometries that shifted, beings of sound and purpose. Some appeared as massive mandalas turning slowly through space, others as glowing orbs with tails of cascading symbols. They were not spirits, they were architects, caretakers of the hidden realms. Helena realized she was not a guest they had been expecting her, not with welcome, but with watchful curiosity, like a scientist observing a rare species that had suddenly wandered into the lab. They examined her thoughts, not her body. They measured her intentions like weights in a balance, and then they began to teach, not with language, but with direct infusion. She would come back from these journeys with entire concepts embedded into her understanding, concepts she had never encountered, yet could now articulate in vivid detail. She learned that dimensions are not like stacked floors of a building, but more like overlapping songs, each with its own melody, tempo, and key. Most humans live in one melody, unaware of the others. But some, like Helena, hear the harmonies. Between these harmonies are where true magic lies. She was shown that every action, every emotion, creates resonance. Love, fear, gratitude, anger, they are not just emotions. They are tones. They affect not only our world but ripple into adjacent dimensions. This is why places feel sacred or haunted. It's not superstition, it's resonance. Events that occur with great emotional or spiritual intensity leave imprints, echoes. In the city of crystal and flame, she saw these echoes as colors, patterns, vibrations, some beautiful, some terrifying, and all of it every thought, every belief interlinked with every other layer of reality. When Helena returned to the cave, she was different. Her eyes burned with clarity. Her breath was light. She had gone somewhere no map described and returned with memories that rewrote her identity. But she wasn't finished. The monks warned her that the path grows darker the deeper you go, that not all dimensions are light. She knew this already. She had sensed them, even in childhood, the shadowed corridors, the watchers with no form. But now she could see them, and she knew where they nested. There was a place they feared to speak of, the 10th layer. The monks called it the unwritten plane. It was not a place of form, but of raw potential. It was the womb of realities, a dimension where nothing yet existed, and everything was possible. Chaos and divinity, madness and birth. The rules of physics, of self, of identity, none of them applied. It was said that to enter the 10th was to risk fragmentation, that your essence could unravel, lost in the infinite weave of becoming. Helena wanted to go, not out of arrogance, but necessity. She sensed that the answers she carried were incomplete, that to truly understand the structure of existence, she had to touch its source. The beings in the city of crystal warned her. They showed her visions of others who had entered the 10th, souls scattered across dimensions, turned into echoes, disjointed ideas floating without anchor. But she was not deterred. She had already given up her name, her home, her world. All that remained was the crossing. She prepared in silence. For days she fasted, meditated, aligned her mind with sacred geometries. Then, in a chamber carved from living stone, she sat before a mirror made of black crystal. It wasn't a mirror for the face, but for the soul. When she gazed into it, she saw herself not as a woman, but as a pulse of energy wrapped in memories, beliefs, experiences. And as she focused, the mirror rippled. A doorway opened, not a physical one, but a shift in perception, a sudden fall. Inward, she entered. There are no words for what she saw. She described it later only in fragments. A storm of symbols that rearranged themselves endlessly. A voice that spoke without sound, yet carried the weight of creation. The sense of falling and rising simultaneously. Thoughts that birthed stars. Questions that turned into galaxies. And in the midst of it, an intelligence vast and indifferent, pulsing with the rhythm of existence itself. It wasn't a god. It wasn't love. It was awareness, pure, endless, watching itself through a trillion eyes. She felt herself begin to dissolve, her memories unspooled like thread. She saw her past lives, her future paths, her alternate selves all flickering in and out like lightning strikes across a cosmic sky. She had seconds or centuries. Time lost shape. She forgot her purpose, forgot her name, forgot she had ever been human. And then, something called her back. A thread, a memory, a whisper from the monks, from the city, from the shape of her soul. She grasped it, barely, pulled, and slowly, painfully, she began to reassemble. Like smoke forming into bone, like a dream coalescing into form, she awoke in the cave, body shaking, tears streaming, air thick with ozone. She had been gone only 3 days, but she knew it had been longer, much longer. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but deeper, like it carried echoes of many voices. She spoke of things that made no sense to her students, no sense to the world. She began to write, not to explain, but to translate, to attempt the impossible, putting the formless into form. The secret doctrine was born, but even she admitted it was only a sliver, a shadow of what she had touched. Most readers saw it as mysticism, as philosophy, but it was none of those. It was a map, a survival guide, a warning. She tried to hide certain truths, to encrypt what could not be safely revealed, but fragments slipped through, hints of the dimensional resonance, descriptions of the beings, symbols from the 10th layer that should not exist in this world. Some readers felt it, a pull, a recognition they couldn't explain. And for a few, the book opened something. They began to dream of the city, began to hear tones that were not music, began to slip. Helena watched with sorrow. She knew not everyone was ready, but she also knew the timing wasn't hers to control. She had stepped into a current larger than herself. The secrets were alive now. The dimensions had noticed, and the veil was trembling. Those who sought to silence her did not wear uniforms, nor did they carry titles. They moved in silence, in shadows, through influence rather than confrontation. No one could identify them by face or by name, yet their presence was felt across governments, religions, secret societies, and occult circles. They had many names depending on who spoke of them: the Watchers, the Order of Silence, the Guardians of the Threshold, but Helena called them the Custodians. They were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were something much more ancient and dangerous. Their task was not to harm but to contain, not to destroy, but to prevent awakening beyond certain boundaries. And Helena, having stepped far beyond what was permitted, was now on their list, not because she was wrong in her theories, but because she was dangerously right. They didn't care about her writings on reincarnation, karma, or hidden masters. They tolerated her teachings on esoteric history and multidimensional beings. These things, to them, were distractions, surface-level truths given to keep seekers occupied. But Helena had gone beyond the surface. She had entered realms where thought shapes matter and where consciousness collapses into form. Before any law of nature applies, she had seen the mechanism behind existence. And that was what the custodians feared most, not the knowledge itself, but the spread of that knowledge, the destabilizing effect of a collective mind awakening too quickly. In her writings and letters, she began to allude to a structure of reality that predates the physical universe, a scaffolding of intent, of energy before matter. She spoke of what she called the dimensional law, a silent protocol enforced by the deeper architecture of being. This law was not written in any book nor enforced by any government, but its violation triggered consequences beyond human perception. According to Helena, our universe is not a sandbox, but a carefully moderated field of awareness, designed to unfold within specific energetic conditions. And when an individual crosses certain thresholds prematurely, that balance is threatened. She had crossed that threshold. She began to notice it first in subtle ways. Books in her study moved slightly out of place. Candles blew out without wind. Dreams became shared with others without any communication. One night, she awoke to find symbols etched into the mirror above her writing desk, symbols that pulsed, with a light too soft to come from any flame. She was not frightened. She was expectant. She knew they were coming. Helena's interactions with the custodians were never direct. They did not speak. They did not confront. They influenced through thoughts, through events, through people who suddenly changed their behavior without knowing why. Trusted allies would begin doubting her, then turning against her, spouting accusations and claims of fraud. Health deteriorated without cause. Letters went missing. Funds for her society vanished inexplicably. In every corner of her life, order decayed slowly, intentionally, like a carefully orchestrated descent into confusion. This was their weapon, not violence, but disintegration. But Helena had prepared for this. She understood the structure of their silence. She knew that while the custodians existed across timelines and dimensions, they were still bound by certain metaphysical laws, laws that prevented them from outright destruction. They could not erase her, only isolate her. They could not silence the truth, only drown it in noise. She responded by going deeper underground, shifting her teachings into symbols and parables, encrypting her insights into layers only the truly ready could access. Her journals became labyrinths. A sentence would appear to mean one thing, but when cross-referenced with another passage written years earlier, a different meaning emerged. She used metaphor like a scalpel, carving new pathways through language, hiding multi-dimensional concepts inside poetic turns and obscure references. She taught her students not to memorize, but to deconstruct, to question every word, every line, every assumption. The teachings themselves became an initiation. Only those with the right frequency could unlock the message. But there was one truth Helena feared above all: the 11th gate. Throughout her life, she hinted at it rarely, and only when the atmosphere around her was charged with absolute trust. It was not a place, not even a realm. It was a rupture, a gap between the seen and unseen, a flaw in the weave of dimensions that leads into the root of all being. The gate was not built, it was revealed, and it opened only under precise energetic alignments, triggered not by tools or rituals, but by collective consciousness reaching a tipping point. She feared this moment because she had seen its aftermath in other timelines, worlds where the gate had opened too early, where beings unprepared for raw creation had looked into the void and seen themselves undone. The 11th gate was a threshold of uncreation. She spoke of it once to a student who was dying. In the final days of the student's life, as fever ravaged her body and the mind slipped between this world and others, Helena sat beside her and whispered, "The gate is not a portal. It is a mirror. It shows you the moment before you were born, and it asks if you are ready to choose again." The student wept, not from fear, but from a knowing that rose from some deep buried part of her soul. She passed away that night, with a smile, whispering a language no one understood. Helena wept, not from sorrow, but because she knew the student had crossed gently. The custodians had only one mission: to prevent humanity from reaching the 11th gate unprepared. But Helena saw their efforts as flawed. Suppression, she believed, was not the answer. Consciousness must evolve through truth, not fear. She wanted to teach the world how to walk toward the gate without losing itself. But time was not on her side. In the years following the publication of The Secret Doctrine, she began to notice increased interference. Certain phrases would vanish from printed copies. Translations would be mysteriously inaccurate. Letters sent to trusted allies never arrived. Once, an entire shipment of books destined for India disappeared during sea transit. The ship wrecked under conditions no sailor could explain. Some called it coincidence. Helena did not. She saw the fingerprints of the custodians in every anomaly. Still, she persisted. She traveled constantly, teaching in living rooms and back alleys, among intellectuals and laborers, speaking of dimensions and frequencies in the language of the heart. She rarely used direct terms anymore. She taught through stories, letting the truth encode itself into the subconscious of listeners. She knew the conscious mind would resist, but the soul remembered. Always, that was the key. Awakening does not happen through logic. It unfolds through recognition. Yet the pressure mounted. One night in London, as she wrote by candlelight, Helena felt the air around her grow heavy. Her skin tingled. The candle flickered violently though. No breeze blew. Then silence, a silence so deep it hummed. She turned and saw them not with her eyes, but with her inner sight. Tall figures, wrapped in veils of shadow and light, not quite in the room, but pressing against the fabric of it. They radiated purpose, not malice, but sternness. Authority older than language. She stood, faced them, and in her mind, said, "I will not stop." They did not speak, but she felt the weight of their reply, a warning. She had crossed the line. The 11th gate was now watching her, and with it others, entities that even the custodians feared. After that night, her health began to deteriorate. Rapidly, doctors could find no cause. She suffered paralysis in her legs, violent fevers, spontaneous bleeding from her nose and ears. Yet her mind remained sharp. Her writings, if anything, became more precise, more potent. She knew she was being burned from the inside out, not by illness, but by frequency. Her energy was no longer resonating with the earth dimension. She was phasing, slowly, gently, like a thread being pulled from one tapestry into another. She began leaving clues, symbols drawn in ash, diagrams etched into wooden floorboards, patterns hidden in the folds of her clothing. Every visitor who came to see her was marked, energetically aligned in subtle ways they didn't understand. She was building something, weaving a net across time and minds, planting seeds that would bloom long after her departure. In one of her final letters, she wrote, "They have failed to stop the echo. It lives now in the rhythm of thought, in the quiet between words. I no longer belong to this story, but I have ensured it continues." Those who received the letter didn't understand its meaning. Not fully, but in time, they would. As strange, Dreams began to haunt their sleep, as moments of déjà vu intensified, as their children began drawing impossible symbols and reciting forgotten languages. The custodians had underestimated her. They tried to stop a woman, but Helena was no longer a woman. She was a resonance, a sequence, a pattern coded into the human soul. To silence her now would be to silence every seeker who felt the pull of the beyond. The 11th gate remained closed, but the map to it had been hidden in plain sight, in myths, in symbols, in the spaces between words. All you had to do was feel it, and once you did, the journey began. In the final years of her life, Helena ceased trying to convince the world of anything. She no longer argued with skeptics, no longer debated with theologians or philosophers, no longer defended her claims against the relentless tide of critics. She had moved past the need to be understood. Instead, she began to speak only in symbols, riddles, fragments. To most, it seemed as if her mind was deteriorating. They whispered of dementia, of exhaustion, of a woman crumbling under the weight of her own madness. But the truth was far stranger. Helena wasn't losing her mind, she was moving out of it. The human mind, as vast as it seems, is still a container, a filter, and hers was becoming too small to hold what was now trying to flow through her. Something had opened within her, and once opened, it could not be shut. She spent hours in complete silence, staring into firelight or the curves of shadows. She'd trace invisible shapes in the air, her fingers gliding with purpose no one else could decipher. Sometimes she would write entire pages of text only to burn them moments later, her face unreadable, her expression neither joyous nor sad, but something deeper, a look of sacred burden. Her students began to notice the strange changes in her surroundings, reflections that lingered too long in mirrors, whispers that came from no mouth, clocks that ticked backward, candles that flickered without flame. Her room had become a threshold, a liminal space no longer fully anchored to this world. There were moments when she would speak suddenly, her voice shifting subtly in tone and rhythm, not dramatically, not theatrically, but enough to make those listening pause. It was as if someone or something was using her vocal cords to communicate, borrowing her breath for brief moments to deliver messages encoded with layers of meaning. Her students wrote down every word, even when they didn't understand them, especially then, because Helena had taught them that real truth is rarely understood in the moment. It reveals itself slowly, unfolding in the spaces between thought and experience. She told one disciple in a whisper, "The wall is not solid, it's only agreement." And when asked what she meant, she simply closed her eyes and began humming a tone so precise and resonant that the floor beneath them seemed to pulse faintly. That was all, no further explanation. But the disciple carried that sentence for the rest of his life, meditating on it until, decades later, during a moment of deep silence, he finally understood. The wall she spoke of wasn't physical, it was conceptual. The separation between dimensions, between what we see and what exists, between self and other. It was a contract we unconsciously signed at birth. But contracts can be rewritten. Helena was preparing herself, and those around her, for a shift, not a moment of death, but of migration, a crossing. She had spoken of this place long before in code, calling it the mirror corridor or the spiral of return. She described it as a dimension folded inward, where time loops like a river returning to its own source. It wasn't heaven, it wasn't an afterlife, it was a chamber of reflection, a space that reveals not what you are, but all that you could have been. The monks in Tibet called it the Chamber of Echoes. The beings in the city of crystal and flame had shown her glimpses of it, warning that entry required absolute surrender. No ego, no memory, just essence. But Helena's essence was fragmented, not from trauma, but from depth. She had lived too many lives within one life, worn too many masks, moved through too many realms. She needed to unify before she could cross. And so, she began her final work. Not a book, not a teaching, but a ritual. A subtle alchemy of time, emotion, and intent. She used silence as her ink, space as her canvas. Every object in her room became a sigil, every movement, a brushstroke. Even her meals when she ate were arranged geometrically, in shapes matching ancient diagrams only she could decipher. The others in the house noticed, that she no longer cast a shadow in the mornings. That mirrors sometimes showed a younger version of her, or someone else entirely. Her presence flickered, like a radio frequency struggling to stay tuned. And when she touched people, they often reported sensations of deep calm, or sudden memories that weren't theirs, or visions of places they had never seen. She had become a portal not to another world, but to another state of being. And then one night, during a violent storm, she disappeared. The wind howled through the streets of London. Rain lashed against windows like fingers trying to get in. Lightning split the sky with mechanical precision, and somewhere within the trembling city, Helena sat in complete stillness. Her candle hadn't been lit, her windows hadn't been opened, but her room was filled with light, pale and flickering, as though the air itself had caught fire. She sat in a circle drawn in a silvery powder, a symbol that no scholar could later identify. Around her, 7 stones pulsed faintly, arranged in a star pattern, each one humming with a frequency just below the range of hearing. No one saw her leave. The door was locked from the inside. No windows were broken. Her belongings remained untouched. Only the circle was scorched, blackened as if by intense heat. On the wall behind where she had sat, 3 symbols were drawn not in ink or ash, but in absence, as if something had removed the very molecules of the wall to etch them, and in the center of the circle lay a single note, folded twice. It read, "I was never from here. The authorities, baffled, declared her dead. Influenza, perhaps, or some other illness. Her body was never found." But those who truly knew her did not mourn. They knew better. They could feel it, not in their minds, but in their bones. Something had shifted. Reality had moved. It was as though a thread had been pulled, unraveling part of the tapestry they once thought immutable. A few days later, some of her students began dreaming of her not as she was, but as she had become, in robes of light, surrounded by shapes that pulsed with sound, speaking in tones that bypassed language entirely. One disciple, an artist, began to paint obsessively. He couldn't explain why. He would wake in the middle of the night, hands trembling, compelled to draw spirals within spirals, faces within stars, cities made of transparent flame. When asked about the source of these visions, he only whispered, "She's teaching me from the other side." Another disciple, a linguist, discovered a pattern hidden in Helena's early essays. Every third sentence contained a code, and when deciphered, it revealed a message not meant for the 19th century, but for the 21st. A prophecy, a warning, a map. Helena had planted seeds for a time when the world would begin to tremble again. A time when technology would outpace wisdom, when noise would drown out silence, when the veil would thin, not through ritual or effort, but by consequence. She knew this time was coming. The mirror was never just a tool. It was a signal, a beacon. Once opened, it would begin to call, first through dreams, then through dissonance. People would feel it as anxiety, as a strange disconnect, as an itch in the soul. They'd look at the sky and feel something watching. They'd touch water and feel memory. They'd begin to question not just what the world was, but what they were. Helena had entered the mirror chamber to prepare for this, to anchor herself in a place that could not be touched by time or death, a place where she could wait, watching from beyond the boundary of perception. And when the signs began, when the sky turned red without flame, when sacred springs flowed backwards, when children began speaking in unknown tongues, she would return, not as a person, but as a pattern, a frequency, a dream that ignites remembrance. The mirror chamber does not reveal the future. It reveals the self, not the self you know, but the self that waits, patient and infinite, behind every moment of your life. Helena had passed through it, leaving behind breadcrumbs in the form of teachings, symbols, stories. And now, long after her disappearance, those breadcrumbs had begun to glow, not for all, only for those who had heard the echo, the subtle hum beneath the noise, the whisper that calls from deep within silence. People began finding her symbols etched into unlikely places, on park benches, in dreams, in the patterns of frost on windows. A teacher in Tokyo dreamed the same dream as a scientist in Norway. A homeless man in New York began reciting verses from the secret doctrine, though he had never learned to read. A child in Cairo drew a perfect map of the Crystal City after waking from a fever. None of it made sense, but all of it fit together, like puzzle pieces scattered across the minds of humanity. Helena was not gone. She was embedded now in the gaps between frequencies, in the silences between words, in the thoughts you didn't know were yours. Her legacy wasn't knowledge, it was transformation. She hadn't opened the 11th gate. Not yet, but she had shown humanity where to look, and more importantly, how to look. By stepping beyond the mind, by entering the mirror, by allowing reality to dissolve into vibration, Helena had become something else, not a saint, not a ghost, but a dimensional node, a consciousness without boundary, a guide waiting to be remembered, not followed. She had always said, "Don't believe me, feel what I'm saying," because truth isn't something you memorize, it's something you awaken into, and those who truly felt her knew that the awakening had only just begun. Decades passed, and the world moved on, as it always does, burying the whispers of the past under layers of skepticism, new discoveries, and rewritten histories. Yet truth has a peculiar persistence that echoes through silence, vibrates beneath the hum of the ordinary, and waits for minds sensitive enough to notice. In a sterile lab tucked inside a forgotten wing of a university, a young physicist named Elias Hartman began seeing patterns no one else could. They started as equations, anomalies in quantum tunneling simulations that shouldn't have existed. At first, he assumed an error in the code, perhaps a calibration glitch. But each time he corrected it, the pattern reemerged stronger, stranger, more deliberate. He didn't know it then, but he was staring into the same veil Helena had once torn through with willpower alone. He became obsessed, night after night. He cross-referenced symbols from ancient manuscripts with quantum geometries and string vibrations. One symbol in particular began repeating itself, a spiral folded inward, cradled by 7 dots, and surrounded by shifting lines that defied static interpretation. He later discovered this exact form carved into a hidden stone beneath the Sphinx, buried deeper than the public excavation sites dared to go. That discovery wasn't recorded in any journal. It wasn't even acknowledged by the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, because when he found the stone, he wasn't alone. A woman stood at the edge of the pit, dressed not in expedition gear, but in flowing black robes that shimmered as if threaded with starlight. She didn't speak a word. She merely nodded, touched the stone once, and disappeared. No footprints, no dust displaced. Only the distinct scent of jasmine and ozone lingering behind. Elias returned home shaken, but something in him had changed. That night, as he tried to sleep, he saw Helena Blavatsky in his dreams. He recognized her immediately, not from any photograph, but as if remembering an old teacher from a past life. She stood inside a burning city of crystal and flame, her hands holding open a doorway that pulsed like a heartbeat. Her eyes met his, and she spoke just one sentence: "You are close, but you must choose knowledge or being." When he woke up, every mirror in his house was shattered, and his digital devices refused to function. There was no record of the dream, no proof, only the echo of her voice repeating inside his head. He tried to tell his colleagues, cautiously at first, mentioning only the mathematical patterns and unexplained geometry. They dismissed it as burnout, a side effect of overexertion. One of them, Professor Kelleher, warned him privately to stop his research, not for his career, but for his safety. "There are things," Kelleher whispered, "that aren't meant to be rediscovered." And she opened the wrong gate. That was all he would say. Elias couldn't let it go. He resigned from the university and went underground, disappearing from public view. Those close to him called it a breakdown, but the truth was far more complex. He began traveling to the places Helena had once written about, comparing her coded words in the secret doctrine with physical coordinates. One led him to the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, where a slab of what looked like fused glass hid beneath layers of sand. Another took him to the Andes, where he found a cave untouched by modern hands, lined with pictographs of human forms merging with spirals and lattice-like grids. But the most important journey led him to Mount Kailash. No one climbs Kailash, not because it's impossible, but because the legends warn against it. The mountain is considered sacred, believed to be a portal between worlds. And Elias knew it wasn't a metaphor. He camped near the base, meditating with Tibetan monks who, without asking, handed him a map that wasn't drawn with ink, but etched with sound vibrations captured in silver. The symbols on the map matched those Helena had scrawled in her personal journals never published, but whispered to exist among theosophical circles. The monks said nothing to Elias directly, only that his frequency was becoming visible. He didn't understand then, but as he walked through a narrow passage hidden behind sheets of ice, he felt reality shift. Colors became sounds. Time no longer flowed in a straight line. He would blink and see childhood memories play before him like holograms, only to blink again and witness ancient rituals he'd never lived through. At the very center of the cave, he found an obsidian pedestal, and on it rested a single stone tablet inscribed with symbols that shimmered and moved like living text. As he touched it, he heard Helena's voice again. "You are in the fold now. Do not trust the silence that follows." When he returned to the world, he brought nothing back but the knowledge inside his altered mind. He began writing feverishly diagrams, formulas, stories from places he never visited physically, but remembered clearly. People who read his notes reported strange phenomena, time distortions, shared dreams, light bulbs flickering when none were powered, phones recording sounds that hadn't occurred. A group of researchers tried to replicate his notes. 3 of them disappeared. One went mad and carved a spiral into every wall of his apartment before vanishing without a trace. The government intervened quietly. Elias was taken, not arrested. Taken, and then nothing. His name erased from academic databases. His papers discredited. But among certain digital circles, his writings lived on. Leaked PDFs filled with strange equations, distorted images of Helena's symbols, and warnings about something called the 11th gate. Across the world, those who had never met began having identical dreams of a great city made of crystal and flame, of a voice whispering, "You've already crossed." In remote villages, children began drawing spirals with their fingers in the dirt, reciting ancient chants no one had taught them. Psychics and mystics began reporting a surge of energy they couldn't explain, like a frequency swelling across all of existence, too subtle to detect with machines, but undeniable in the soul. Helena's secret was reawakening. The veil was thinning again, not because someone forced it, but because humanity's collective consciousness had reached a threshold. We had dreamed too vividly, believed too strongly, thought too deeply. The dimensions responded. The custodians, ancient and nameless, emerged once more from their hidden fortresses, not to attack, but to contain. Their duty had always been to keep the 11th gate sealed, because what lies beyond it isn't just knowledge, it's dissolution. Not death, not oblivion, but the unraveling of self. The custodians appeared as ordinary people. A woman reading a newspaper on a park bench, a man feeding pigeons in Istanbul, a monk sweeping the steps of an old temple. They watched, they listened, and when the signs became too frequent, when too many people saw Helena in dreams, they intervened. Quietly, efficiently, disappearances labeled as strokes, madness ascribed to schizophrenia, premonitions dismissed as coincidence. But what they feared most was not Elias, it was the collective awakening he had sparked. For every person who vanished, 3 more questioned. For every silenced voice, 1,000 more began humming the same unknown melody. And the symbols started appearing in unexpected places. Not just on ancient stones or forgotten temples, but in the code of AI art generators, in random glitches during live streams, in the structure of viral songs. People didn't even know they were seeing them, but their subconscious did, and it responded. Because the 11th gate is not a door in space, it's a shift in perception, a frequency, and when enough minds tune into it simultaneously, reality begins to tear. The dimensional bleed became more visible. People reported moments of pause where everything around them froze, and they saw something behind the world, vast, luminous, and utterly incomprehensible. Others spoke of crossing over in dreams and waking up with scars they didn't go to bed with. Helena had always said, the dream world is not fiction, it is preview. And the preview was turning into performance. Cities began to hum. At night, an eerie vibration no machine could detect but sensitive minds could feel in their bones. Migraines swept across populations. Static filled the airwaves at random hours. And in the middle of all this chaos, the name Helena Blavatsky resurfaced not in history books, but on lips trembling with half-understood awe. Some said she never died, that she ascended into the dimension she had glimpsed and left a fragment of herself behind a code embedded in human consciousness, triggered at the right moment in collective evolution. Others said she had warned of this, that her greatest fear wasn't her own end, but the misuse of what she discovered. The 11th gate, she wrote in a letter once burned and now reconstructed from partial fragments, is a door that does not open with keys, but with will. And if opened for the wrong reason, it opens both ways. What Elias began could not be stopped. Not now. The truth was out not on headlines or screens, but in vibrations, in dreams. In the quiet knowing that reality isn't quite right anymore. That there is something on the other side of the mirror, watching, waiting, whispering the same name again and again through the veil of dimensions. Helena, Helena, Helena. They say madness and enlightenment live on the same razor's edge, and Helena had long danced between the two. Her disappearance from the public eye wasn't an active retreat, it was a passage. There were records of her final years, but they contradicted each other so wildly that no historian could determine the truth. Some claimed she died quietly in London, others insisted she was spotted in Tibet. Others still whispered of a woman matching her description, who was seen walking barefoot across the salt flats of Bolivia, speaking to no one, eyes blazing with light. The Theosophical Society claimed to have her letters, but when examined, they seemed to be written in layers, text visible in one light, different meanings revealed under another. The message, they said, was buried in frequency, in the silences between the lines. Scholars dismissed it as myth, but myths, Helena believed, were truths that time had worn into parables. There was something she had learned, something so immense and impossible to contain in a sentence or a page, that she had buried it in symbols, in the gaps of perception. Before she vanished, she had written only one clear warning: they are not gods, they are mirrors. She never explained what they were, but those who studied her works closely began to piece together a terrifying consistency. The beings she referenced sometimes as custodians, sometimes as watchers, sometimes as fragments weren't external entities, but conscious reflections of the observer. When one peers too deeply into the fabric of reality, that fabric starts to respond, not by revealing truth, but by echoing back the observer's soul. Helena had seen something, not a place, not even a being, a process, a knowing, and it had followed her, long after her name faded from scholarly texts. Her essence remained buried in places only the mad and the faithful visited. A desert monastery in northern Sudan bore her symbol etched into its walls, despite no record of her ever traveling there. An underground vault in Rome, sealed off since the 1500s, was found to contain a crystalline object wrapped in linen that radiated a frequency only audible to certain children. No one could explain how it got there, but inside the linen, tucked within layers of ancient cloth, was a note. She walked still. It read, in Helena's unmistakable handwriting. In the years that followed Elias's disappearance, others began to pick up the trail. Not scientists, not academics, wanderers, people who had seen things they weren't supposed to, slips in reality, fractures in time. A woman named Ela from Morocco who claimed to see threads of light connecting every person she met. A man in Prague who painted detailed images of cities no one had ever heard of. Cities with geometries that defied physics. Cities he swore he had walked through in his dreams. A hacker in Seoul who embedded Helena's symbols into blockchain sequences and watched as AI-generated texts began repeating her phrases. None of them knew each other, but they were being drawn together like particles orbiting a center of gravity that didn't exist in space, but in thought. And then came the music. At first, it was a hum, heard only by a few. Then it spread through the internet, in the static between radio stations, in the silence after a song ends, a melody with no origin, repeating motifs that resonated with those who had seen beyond the veil. Some tried to recreate it with instruments, none could, because it wasn't meant to be heard with ears, it was meant to be remembered. Those who truly heard it would fall silent afterward, speaking less, sleeping more. And in their dreams, they all saw the same woman, Helena, standing in the center of a spiraling structure made of thought, her eyes shimmering with galaxies, her hands outstretched as if offering both salvation and oblivion. The governments of the world began to notice, not officially, not on the record, but whispers circulated among intelligence agencies about a pattern of informational anomalies, spreading through communication networks, an increase in mass dreams, spikes in unexplained electromagnetic fields. A new classification was created: DVS, dimensional visual symptoms. Those diagnosed with DVS were often institutionalized, but in those institutions, entire groups began speaking in synchrony, drawing the same symbols on the walls, reciting lines from the secret doctrine despite never having read it. The authorities thought it was a new virus, a mental contagion, but it was something much older, something Helena had warned about. Consciousness, once awakened to the dimensional structure, begins to reorganize itself. One researcher, Dr. Mara Chen, took a risk. She began correlating data from mental institutions, dream logs, and quantum fluctuation readings. The more she compiled, the clearer the image became. There was a griddle lattice-like structure emerging across human consciousness, aligning certain minds like antennas. They weren't sick, they were tuning in. To what? She didn't know. But one name kept appearing in their writings. Not Blavatsky, not Helena, just she. And always capitalized, as if referring not to a person, but a presence, a force, a mother of dimensions. Dr. Chen's research was never published. 1 week before her paper was due to be presented at an academic conference in Geneva, her apartment caught fire. Nothing survived, but fragments of her work had already spread through encrypted forms, diagrams, showing the same spiral shape that Elias had seen beneath the Sphinx, the same patterns etched into stones in Peru, the same frequency embedded in Helena's teachings. Helena hadn't just discovered a secret, she had seeded it, planted it across time, dimension, and language, and now it was blooming. Those who felt the change began to see the world differently. Not metaphorically, literally. Faces shimmered, for a second, revealing other forms beneath strange, luminous blueprints, as if people were being projected from some higher dimension. Time began to fold. People reported déjà vu stretching into hours. Others swore they had conversations with loved ones who had died, not in dreams, but in waking reality, in rooms full of light that flickered like candle flames. The world was becoming soft, not weak, malleable, as if the physical rules we relied on were only ever suggestions. And somewhere beneath all this, Helena watched. In old libraries and private archives, her presence stirred once more. Books rearranged themselves subtly. Phrases that had never been there before began appearing in margins. Not ink. Impressions as if the paper remembered her touch. She will rise through minds. One such imprint read, and when enough, remember, the gate will cease to be a gate. This wasn't prophecy, it was design. Helena had once said, thought is the architect of reality. But now reality itself seemed to be remembering something it had once known, long before human history, long before matter solidified into form. The 11th gate was never a place. It was an event, a shift, a collapse of separation between observer and observed. And it was happening now, not all at once, but like a tide rolling across dimensions. Some resisted, others embraced it, but no one could stop it, because it had already happened in some other frame of time, and this world was merely catching up. Helena, in her final writings, hinted at something called the refraction point, a moment when perception bends so sharply that it turns inward, swallowing the self and birthing a new awareness. Many had brushed it off as metaphor, but those who had started seeing the patterns, hearing the music, touching the other side, they knew it was real. People began disappearing, not tragically, but silently. Rooms found empty with no signs of struggle. Journals left behind spoke of answering the call, of being ready, of stepping through. But stepping through what? There were no doors, no rituals, only alignment. And when the alignment occurred, they vanished. Not dead, not abducted, just gone. Light filled their last locations. Faint traces of a melody echoed in the air. Sometimes, hours later, shadows moved across surfaces as if someone was still there, flickering between dimensions. Sometimes, their voices were heard in white noise, whispering lines from Helena's texts. But not in her voice. In their own. Reality was changing, not breaking, but evolving. Faster in some places than others. Old spiritual sites began to resonate. Again, animals started behaving oddly, pausing to look at empty spaces, howling at shapes no one else could see. Children, especially, were attuned. They spoke of their other lives not with confusion, but certainty. They asked parents why the sky sometimes looked like a painting, why the moon had cracks, why people were forgetting. They said the world was being rewritten and that they could still remember the before. And still, Helena's presence lingered not as a ghost, but as a signal. She had become something more than human, not divine, but dimensional. She had unraveled the self so completely that only essence remained, an essence that could be felt. When silence deepened, when thoughts became still, when the boundary between inner and outer dissolved, in those moments, people felt her, not like someone watching, but like a presence remembering through them, a being who had once walked this world, but now lived in the folds of awareness itself. And so the spiral continued, winding inward, calling those who dared to look not outward, but within, not to ascend, but to dissolve, not to escape, but to awaken. And behind it all, beneath the hum of the universe, a voice whispered the one truth Helena had always known but never said aloud, because to say it would be to end the game. And the game was the point, the forgetting, the remembering, the endless journey through shadow and light, until one day, the reflection no longer startles but smiles back, and the mirror finally disappears. Of all the fears that haunted Helena in the quietest moments of her life, it was not the wrath of governments, nor the ridicule of the scientific community, nor even the strange apparitions that stalked her from across the veil. It was the fear of being misunderstood. She once said that a misinterpreted truth is more dangerous than a well-crafted lie, because while lies wither in light, misunderstood truths spread like wildfire and burn through the foundations of entire civilizations. What Helena discovered was never intended to be hoarded or used to elevate a few at the cost of many. The dimensional secret was not a treasure, it was a test, and she knew that humanity's craving for control would push it toward treating this knowledge like any other tool of conquest. That fear gnawed at her deeply, not because she didn't trust truth, but because she knew how far people would go to twist it. When Helena began mapping the 10 known dimensional layers, she wasn't drawing charts, she was documenting phenomena that occurred when the human consciousness detached from physical anchors and engaged with a reality constructed by frequency and intention. Her notes were never linear, often scribbled during trances or after hours of meditative stillness. She saw realms shaped by thought, where the laws of physics responded not to gravity or mass, but to memory, desire, guilt, and imagination. In one layer, she found a city made entirely of mirrors, reflecting not the viewer's present self, but fragments of who they had been across countless timelines. In another, there were no forms, only colors that hummed with sentience, vibrating with an emotion so pure it couldn't be translated into any human language. Helena warned her disciples that these dimensions were not simply places, they were alive. They observed the observer, they offered reflections, but sometimes they showed futures that had not yet occurred or regrets that hadn't yet been felt. And as she deepened her exploration, she realized the terrifying truth that each dimension was less a place to explore and more a test of readiness. The farther one traveled, the more unstable identity became. Who you were mattered less than what you projected. Those who journeyed without self-awareness were torn apart not by monsters, but by their own forgotten traumas, mirrored and magnified by the dimensional substrate. It was in this dangerous journey inward and outward that Helena came upon the 11th gate. Unlike the other realms that still held tethered rules and thresholds, the 11th gate was formless, a point of singularity where all distinctions dissolved. Time, space, and self blended into one luminous field of unfiltered awareness. But the price of entry was absolute humility. To pass through the 11th gate, one had to surrender every layer of ego, every clinging desire, every belief, even Belief in the self. For this reason, Helena believed no one was truly ready to open it, not even herself, and this belief, paradoxically, made her the closest to it. But not everyone saw it the way she did. Round her grew whispers, cults, obsessions. Her students became restless, some believing Helena was hoarding power instead of protecting it. A few broke away from her and sought their own means of accessing the 11th gate, attempting crude rituals and reverse engineering the symbols she left behind. Some were never seen again. Others returned shattered, unable to speak, their eyes filled with landscapes no one else could see. Helena wept for them not because they failed, but because they had tried with the wrong hearts. She realized that her silence was not enough to protect the secret. She had to hide the path itself. So she took her knowledge and buried it within culture, language, and architecture. The symbols of the 11th gate were encoded into ancient, religious texts, misunderstood by most but resonant with those vibrating at the edge of dimensional awakening. She disguised frequencies as chants, geometries as prayer rugs, mantras as holy verses. The truth was camouflaged beneath the sacred traditions of humanity, safe from those who would abuse it, yet visible to those ready to see beyond form. Even the number 11, recurring in sacred numerology, rituals, and architecture, was a quiet nod to the final threshold. Still, she knew it was not enough. Some seekers were relentless, their obsession fueled by lust for divinity or domination. Helena began sensing their approach. Individuals who were brilliant but heartless, disciplined but soulless. They mirrored the custodians, but with no sacred vow to protect, only a hunger to consume. To them, the 11th gate was a power source, not a point of surrender. They believed that to open it meant to rewrite the world according to their own image. Helena called them the shadows between. They existed across nations, hiding in academia, religion, and government. She knew they would come for her, not with swords, but with questions disguised as curiosity, invitations dressed as diplomacy. To guard herself, she crafted illusions, false trails, and decoy doctrines. Some of her later writings were deliberate, misdirections, riddles that only aligned when approached with the correct emotional state. To the arrogant, they appeared as nonsense. To the fearful, they seemed dangerous. But to the balanced mind, those rare few, they offered silent invitations toward deeper knowing. Helena believed that knowledge was like a mirror. It reflected your own readiness. If you stared into it with pure intent, it gave light. If you stared into it with corruption, it shattered. But time was turning. Helena saw it in the sky, in dreams, and in the strange behavior of birds and children. She spoke of signs that would mark the awakening of the gate. The first was when the sky turned red, without fire, a sign of dimensional bleed, where layered realities thinned and bled into each other. The second was when water flowed backward, in sacred places, a signal that time itself had begun to reverse in symbolic locations. The third, and final sign, was when children across the world began dreaming in the same unknown language. These dreams would be more than sleep. They would be transmissions from the edge of the 11th gate, calling the next generation forward. Many laughed at her predictions, calling them poetic nonsense. But even in ridicule, Helena never faltered. She knew truth didn't need to be defended. It only needed to be witnessed. She focused her remaining days on mentoring the few who had proven not only mental discipline, but spiritual sincerity. These weren't the loud or the popular. They were the ones who sat in silence, who felt the weight of unseen things, who walked through crowds and knew they didn't fully belong here. To them, she gave not instructions, but impulses. She would leave an object in their room, or hum a forgotten melody near them, or touch a page in a book that held a cipher they hadn't yet noticed. To Helena, real initiation could not be spoken. It had to be lived. Her fear of misinterpretation remained, but she also held hope, a hope that somewhere down the line, long after she was gone, someone would understand not just her teachings, but her silence. She believed the 11th gate would eventually open, not with thunder or explosions, but with a breath, a realization, a stillness so complete it would reset the rhythm of existence itself. But it would require someone willing to die to everything they think they are, someone who would not enter the gate with demands, but with devotion, someone who would not seek to conquer the dimensional truth, but to become one with it. She recorded her final observations in a leather-bound journal with no title, no name, and no date. She buried it in a place where metal sings and water glows somewhere, only revealed when the three signs converge. She inscribed only one phrase in its opening page: "The map is not the terrain. The key is not the gate. You are not what you remember." These words, Helena believed, would act as a final riddle, a dimensional compass pointing not outward, but inward, because the 11th gate, in its purest form, was never a place. It was a mirror waiting for the one who could look at it without flinching, without needing, without breaking. And still, even as her body aged and her hands trembled, Helena felt the pulse of the gate in her bones. It beat like a second heart, a rhythm not of blood but of light. She knew her time was limited, but her work was eternal. The secret had been planted not in soil, but in souls, and it would awaken when the world began to fall apart, when humanity realized that no weapon, no theory, no leader could fix the unraveling. Only then would someone look inward deeply enough to see the shimmer, to feel the gate, and to hear the quiet echo of her voice whispering across dimensions, calling them home. She knew it would end like this, not with applause or closure, but with a silent knowing, a hum beneath the surface of all things. Helena had never feared death. To her, it was not an end, only a subtle shift, a movement between dimensions, a crossing of a line that most minds were too afraid to see. She sat in the stillness of her final night, surrounded by dim candlelight, the shadows on her walls dancing in patterns known only to her. Around her were no students, no followers, no great names of history, only silence, and the quiet flicker of truth she had lived her life to protect. She did not need witnesses, because she had already seen what mattered. In the final days, her visions became more vivid, not hallucinations, but pure dimensional bleed, as if the veil between layers had grown so thin it could no longer hold back the tide. She saw children born with memories of cities that had never existed in this world. She saw animals gather around dying rivers, their eyes filled with something more than instinct, something like waiting. And in the night sky, stars no longer behaved as they once did. They flickered in codes, blinking in rhythmic patterns Helena recognized as messages. She would write them down, and every symbol, every flicker, matched perfectly with fragments from ancient texts she had once dismissed as allegory. Now she knew they were transmissions, ancient frequencies misunderstood by time. The 11th gate had begun to respond. It was subtle at first, like a whisper in a dream, but Helena could feel its pull growing stronger. And with that pull came the others, those who had sensed it too. Seekers, dreamers, madmen. Some had been her students long ago, others she had never met in this life, yet they found their way to her through symbols, whispers, and forgotten dreams. They arrived one by one, not asking questions, but sitting in silence, waiting. None of them knew exactly what they waited for. It was a knowing beyond language, the way the tide knows the moon without needing to understand it. They only knew. They were being called. Helena no longer spoke much. Words felt too clumsy, too small for what pressed against the edge of her perception. She would simply sit among them, her presence enough to transmit what needed to be known. In these silent gatherings, they began to share dreams, and patterns began to emerge. Across the globe, children were dreaming of a doorway made of light, suspended in a place where time folded inward. The same dream, told in different languages, with matching details. Some of the children drew maps they had never seen before, maps that matched Helena's earliest dimensional diagrams. Something had begun, and then it happened. The first sign. A city in the northern hemisphere awoke one morning to find its sky blood red, not from pollution or weather, but from something else. Instruments could not explain it. Cameras failed to capture its true color. Witnesses reported hearing a low hum in their bones, a frequency not audible to the ear but felt in the chest. Panic spread quickly, but Helena, upon hearing the news, simply smiled. She whispered to herself, "The first door has opened." Days later, it was the second sign, a sacred spring, long revered by indigenous people for its healing properties, reversed its flow. The water ran uphill. Scientists from around the world gathered to observe, but their tools offered no answers. The water defied gravity, logic, and time. Elders in the region declared the moment a circle completed. Helena watched from afar, her eyes filling with tears, not of fear but of awe. The second gate had stirred. The world was shifting dot, and then the third dot all over the globe. Children began to hum the same melody. They did not learn it from media, nor each other. It was haunting, beautiful, and eerily consistent in tone and rhythm. Helena recognized it immediately. It was the frequency she had first heard when nearing the 11th gate, a sound not made by voice or instrument, but by consciousness itself. Parents recorded their children, and when audio engineers analyzed the sound, they found frequencies outside the known human vocal range. Some parts of the melody affected machinery, causing lights to flicker or digital clocks to reset. And in the quiet, Helena wept. The 11th gate had awakened. It was no longer waiting, it was calling. But the awakening of such power does not come without resistance. The shadows between the same dark forces who had once tried to steal the knowledge. Helena buried sensed the shift. They had not disappeared. They had gone underground, perfecting their disguises. Now they moved with urgency, deploying misinformation, engineering fear, and manipulating truth to prevent humanity from reaching the threshold. They broadcast fear wrapped in reason and doubt wrapped in science. They tried to convince the world that the children were ill, that the sky was poisoned, that the water was a symptom of global collapse. But the awakened could not be fooled. Helena knew time was short. She gathered the final circle of souls, those few who had awakened fully to the truth, and gave them her last teaching, not in words, but through a transfer of presence. She placed her hands on each of them, and in that moment, they saw what she had seen. They felt the dimensions, open like petals of a cosmic flower. They understood the tests, the illusions, the sacrifices. Most of all, they understood that the 11th gate was not a doorway to power, but to surrender. A gate that opened not to the dominant, but to the silent, not to those who demanded, but to those who listened. With her work complete, Helena retreated to the place where it all began, the hidden temple beneath the Carpathian Mountains, where she had first felt the gate's call. It was not a temple in the traditional sense. There were no idols, no ceremonies, just stillness, light, and geometry. The walls pulsed with symbols that changed shape depending on who observed them. To the uninitiated, they were meaningless. But to Helena, they were alive, breathing. She entered the inner sanctum, where the air vibrated with a gentle hum. She lay down in the center of the room, aligned with the invisible currents of the earth, and closed her eyes. Those present watched as her body began to shimmer, slowly fading from view, not disappearing, but phasing. Her breath stilled, but her body did not collapse. It remained upright, suspended slightly above the floor. Illuminated from within, a soft wind blew through the chamber, though no doors were open. A golden light filled the space, and the symbols on the wall burned brightly one last time before dimming into silence. Helena Blavatsky was gone, but she was not dead. Those who witnessed the moment spoke of a peace unlike anything they had ever known. Not happiness, not relief, but completion. The gate had accepted her. She had passed through, not as a conqueror, but as a reflection of what humanity could become when it remembered its source. After her passing, the world did not change overnight. Darkness still persisted. Conflicts continued. But a seed had been planted. A quiet revolution began. All over the world, people began dreaming of light. Children spoke of places they had never seen, but could describe in vivid detail. Empathy returned like a forgotten language. Fear lost some of its grip. And those who had touched Helena's truth began to rise: teachers, artists, healers, builders. They carried no banners, no manifestos. They simply lived differently. And the world, slowly, began to shift. The 11th gate still waits. It is not found in temples or books, nor in rituals or chants. It is found in the silence between thoughts, in the courage to release control, in the stillness of an open heart. Helena's legacy is not a secret to be kept, but a frequency to be remembered. Those who seek it with greed will find only madness, but those who come with humility will find the path unfolding before them, step by quiet step. Because the dimensional secret was never about escape, it was about becoming. Not gods, not masters, but reflections of the original light. Helena's life was a bridge between what is and what could be. And though her voice is silent now, her frequency continues, humming in the bones of the earth, echoing through time, waiting for the next soul brave enough to listen.